Good evening and welcome to tonight's Artist Talk with Frank Quitely. My name is Nina Müller and I'm really happy to be able to welcome you tonight in the name of the amerikahaus. I work here in the program department and tonight we're going to have a great event. The well-known comic artist Frank Quitely will give us an insight into his work. He will talk with Michael Komper, who is the curator of our current exhibition, 60 Years Marvel Comics, which you can still visit here at amerikahaus Munich until the end of September. So if you haven't seen it yet, come visit us in Munich and have a look at our great exhibit. During the summer, we already had some really nice artist talks with really great comic artists, but tonight we're happy that we can offer you another one. Frank Quitely, he lives in Scotland and we'll have him live from Scotland in just a couple of minutes. He's worked with a lot of great comic book authors and he just published comics for Marvel, DC, or Image. So he's really well known. Together with Mark Millar, he has created a Netflix series, Jupiter's Legacy, which is available on Netflix. And since May of this year, so since May 2021, you can watch it there. I won't say any more words about Frank or Michael because they're gonna have enough time to talk about their work and the background in just a couple of minutes, just to let you know if you wanna ask questions throughout the event, like whenever you want to ask a question, feel free to post it in the comment area of YouTube, or if you don't wanna post it on YouTube, you can send us an email to event@amerikahaus.de. So it's event@amerikahaus.de. We will get to your questions at the end of the talk and we hope we will be able to answer all of them. Without further ado, I would like to give the word to Michael. Michael will give a short introduction of Vince and then I'm sure we're gonna have a great talk tonight. So welcome, Michael and Frank. Sorry.
Thanks, Nina. Hello, Frank. Or I guess maybe most of the comic book readers know that your name is an alias, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
You get fan mails or not? I guess.
Occasionally. Yes, occasionally.
Okay, so maybe for the beginning, it's good to explain a little bit why we had invited you. We have a big Marvel exhibition. I think most people, when they think about your work, they think, hey, Frank Quitely, he had lots of stuff at DC. Of course, All-Star Superman was one big hit. I think maybe one of the most important books about Superman. You have a very nice art book at DC. You have your own Batmobile at DC. I hope you can see it. And even your own toys at DC.
Yeah.
So, yeah, most people might think, okay, he's a DC artist, and now we are talking about a Marvel exhibition, and here's why will you talk with Frank Quitely? And there you have also a very, very heavy book, much stuff at Marvel, and a very big impact on the X-Men. If you're reading in the charts of the 10 most influential X-Men story, there are 2 storylines from you and Grant Morrison, and yeah, the fans say after John Byrne and Chris Claremont, you are the 2 most important creators of the X-Men. So we want to talk about the X-Men, about your work for Marvel. Of course, we will talk a little bit, but only a little bit about DC. And what is interesting for us, maybe about the movies and the series, because now, since May, there's Jupiter's Legacy. When I've seen you the last time, it was maybe 7 years ago. We were sitting in Glasgow and you said, I have a job with Mark Millar. I don't have much time to go to conventions because this will make me rich. Sometime there will be a movie and I will have a tiger. When you see me the next time, I have a tiger fur and rings all of my fingers. Yeah. I hope you're rich, but on the other side, I'm happy that you don't wear tiger fur. So
yeah, I took off my my fur coat and all my diamond rings so that I didn't look too ostentatious for this talk.
Okay. So, yeah, how do you want to be called? Your allies is Frank Quitely. Your friends call you Vincent.
You can call me either. I don't mind.
So Vince. So maybe we start a little bit about your beginning in the comics industry in the UK. I think this might be also a good start for the British invasion in comic artists, because if you see lots of important works which they are containing your work as well, there's a big influence about British artists in the comics industry. So maybe you can talk a little bit how you started, why you choose that name Frank Quitely instead of Vincent Deighan, and and how the start was from the UK, how you broke into the US market.
The start was very simple. There was an underground comic just beginning in Glasgow, in Scotland, where I live. It was called Electric Soup, and I was invited to join in with the first issue right at the start. They were looking for artists and writers. They were really looking for people who could write and draw their own strips, adult humor. And it was because of the adult humor that I came up with the name Frank Quitely. It's a play on words. It's a spoonerism of quite frankly, which means to be honest. And I was hiding behind a made up name, so I was being dishonest. I thought it was a good name for a comedy comic, and I did this from 1989 until about 92 or something. We were nearly 3 years doing Electric Soup. It made a small impact. I started to learn some things about writing and drawing, but the big impact for me was that it encouraged me to send sample pages, submissions to 2000 AD and the Judge Dredd magazine. And it was on the strength of these sample pages that I started getting fully professional work. And after just a couple of years of working at the Judge Dredd magazine, I did a Western strip called Missionary Man and a Japanese strip called Shimura. And then I went to a convention in London, and some Vertigo editors were there looking for new talent. There was Art Young and Shelley Bond and Karen Berger. And I was invited to show my folio, and I was interviewed. And on the strength of that, I was offered work first with Paradox Press on the big books, which were coffee table style books, black and white short stories, and then after that with the Flex Mentalo with Grant Morrison, which was I had met Grant in Glasgow because he lived in the same city as me, but I knew Grant a little bit just to socially, in the comic scene in Glasgow. And a little after that, I met Mark Millar as well. But this was the first time I had worked with Grant, and it was a turning point for me. I knew I had met a kindred spirit and somebody that I would want to work with again.
Yeah, I think you did lots of work together. Some lots of people say that you are the perfect match, because I think the books, when you both work together, those are maybe the most famous books Grant Morrison created, and for you as well. I think it's a great mixture when you work together. And
yeah.
And after Flex Mentallo, then came Batman Scottish Connection, or what next?
Yes, with Alan Grant, another Scottish writer. Alan had been writing a Batman Shadow of the Bat for years. He had also been writing Lobo with Keith Giffen and Simon Bisley. And Alan wrote me a Lobo story that was never published. I did the penciling for it, but it never came out. It was too extreme for the regular DC universe, but not quite right for mature readers, and it never came out. I penciled it but didn't ink it, and nothing happened with it. But after that, Alan wrote me another story, and it was Batman: The Scottish Connection, and originally it was a story that Alan wrote about Bruce Wayne.
It's more something like a James Bond story, I think. You're seeing more Bruce Wayne and very few Batman.
Well, the original version that Alan wrote, you're quite right, Michael, but the original story that Alan wrote was even more extreme. It was just Bruce Wayne and no Batman. Bruce Wayne was on holiday. He had come to Scotland to visit the grave of an ancestor, and he discovered or uncovered a mystery, and he solved the mystery like a detective, like Sherlock Holmes. And there was no bad guy, there was no Batman costume, there was no fight. It was just a mystery being solved by a detective. And he was very, very happy with the script, and he sent it to DC, but the editors weren't happy with it. They said, this is not a Batman story, you need to put him in costume. So he rewrote the story and submitted it again, and they said, well, this is better, but we need a bad guy. So he invented a bad guy, and he sent it in, and they said, well, this is better again, but we need a fight. We need to see Batman punch the bad guy. And he rewrote the story many times. And by the time DC accepted the story, Alan had no interest in it anymore. He was finished. He was done with it. And but he didn't tell me that. I had never drawn a Batman story before. So when he sent me the script that DC had approved, and it was the only script I saw, it was the last one that he had written, the one that he was not happy with. And he knew that I was excited to be drawing Batman for the first time. So he just sent me the script and said nothing. And I did the best job that I could do. And up until that point, I had worked in adult comics, underground comics, stuff for Judge Dredd, which wouldn't have been any interest to my mother. Paradox Press short stories, Flex Mentallo, 2020 Visions, nothing that my mother would be interested in. And eventually I drew a Batman book. So I said to my mum, here's the Batman book. And she read it, and she said to me, this is very good. She said, your drawings are very good. She said, but the story is rubbish. And of course, as soon as she said that, I picked up the phone and phoned Alan and told him that my mum thought his story was rubbish. And he started laughing. He said, tell your mother she's right. And that's when he told me that he had rewritten the story 3, 4, 5 times and didn't like it anymore. He had lost all the enthusiasm for it. But it was a great moment for me, because it felt like a stepping stone going from Paradox and Vertigo and British comics up to the DC universe and working on an iconic character. So it was a big thing for me.
So long time after that, you came back to Batman. Yes. How was it then when you came back to Batman with Grant Morrison again? Then with Grant Morrison, not with Alan Grant.
Yes. Well, of course, I had, by this time when I did Batman and Robin, I had worked with Grant on JLA Earth 2 and the last issue of The Invisibles and Flex Mentallo, of course, and the 10 issues that I drew of New X-Men, which to that point was a personal highlight in my career. And Grant started talking to me. In fact, I had done a We 3 at that point as well with Grant. And Grant started talking to me about, I had also done All-Star Superman. So I had worked many times with Grant by this time, and Grant wanted me to he had a plan for doing 15 issues of Batman and Robin. And it was 5 story arcs. Each story arc was 3 issues, and the 15 went together to make one bigger story. And he wanted me to do the first 3 and the last 3. And the first 3 was introducing lots of new characters that were like circus freaks, the bearded lady and the man with the burning head, and the 3 martial artists who were joined at the shoulder blades.
Professor Pig.
And Professor Pig, of course, who turned out to be a very, very popular character. So I was very excited to be coming on board to launch the new series, which was the same thing when Grant was doing New X-Men. He wanted me to do the first 3 issues to get the ball rolling. And but with Batman and Robin, I had to do the first 3, which was all these new characters, and then I had to do the last 3, which was the Joker. And I hadn't done any Joker stuff, so I was really excited at the prospect of this. But I had some health problems. I got sciatica, a back problem from sitting too long, and I managed to do the first 3 issues and all the covers, but I couldn't do the last 3 issues because my health wasn't good enough. But it was another point in my career where I was working with a close friend and a writer that I admire and respect, and I felt the work was very good, and I was very engaged with it, and it was a very good point in my career, and I was disappointed that I couldn't do the last 3 issues with the Joker, but it was a good time. It's a good time. I'm glad I did it. You're muted.
I tried to share.
You're muted again. I can't hear you, Michael.
Do you hear me now?
Yes, I hear you now. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you see Grant Morrison?
I do indeed.
I think this is a great drawing you made of Grant. I think it was for the Playboy magazine, and there's a lot of characters which of course Grant worked on, but when I see most of them, I think 70 or 80% of them, you both together worked on them.
Yes, that's right.
Really, yes. I like the way of your Superman. I think it's very unique when you draw flying people. They are hanging in the air. It's so elegant when the people are flying. It looks so easy to fly. And
I'm sure it is if you've got superpowers.
Yes, and then maybe coming back to the X-Men, you've talked about the new X-Men, and it was 2001, I think, when they started. It was very close after the X-Men movie of Bryan Singer, and I think that Marvel wanted to have a new look and a new power on the X-Men. So how did it start? They asked Grant Morrison to start it, and then he came to you? How was it?
Yes, that's exactly right. Marvel approached Grant Morrison, and Grant then approached me, and he said he had a plan, a very, very big plan for doing the X-Men, and he wanted me to do the first 3 issues and then just whatever other issues I could, because he would be using a roster of other artists in order to keep the book monthly. Interestingly, years before I had said to Grant, when we were working together, Flex Mentallo had been a success for Vertigo, and JLA had been a success for DC Universe. And I had said to Grant, could we not do the X-Men? Because the X-Men was the biggest book, and I wanted to draw the X-Men. And Grant, years ago, Grant used to say, I don't want to do the X-Men. I don't have an X-Men story to tell. And then years later, when Marvel approached Grant about doing the X-Men, he did have a story to tell. And what he said to me was, he said, I've been thinking about it, and the Fantastic Four is basically a family dynamic, and the Avengers is basically a team book, like a sports team. But the X-Men is a school. It's a soap opera set in a school. And there's a dynamic amongst the teachers. There's a dynamic amongst the students. And there's a dynamic between the students and the teachers. And sometimes the teachers have to go out and do superhero stuff. And it's about inclusivity. It's about accepting difference. It's about being okay with yourself the way you are. And he said, I know what to do with it now. I know the stories I want to tell, and I want you to come in at the start. And one of the earliest discussions we had was about the fact that in the recent movies, they had a certain look. Yeah. And we were talking about the costumes, and Grant said they should have suits, not just random different superhero suits. They should look like a team. They should look like they work together. And he asked my opinion, and he said, how would you dress if you had superpowers? And I said, well, I would dress the same way I always dress. I wouldn't wear a costume because I had superpowers. I would just wear my regular clothes. And I thought it would be interesting to do an X-Men book where nobody had a costume. And he was no.
Leather jackets and what clothes is it?
And Grant's idea was that they should have functioning suits like these leather suits, but that they should have high visibility X's on them because of the X-Men, but also because they should look like the emergency services, because effectively they're the emergency services for mutants, for kids who are suddenly finding out that they're mutating, and the X-Men come in and rescue them and take them to the school and help them find their place, you know. And in retrospect, it was a good idea. At the time, I was resistant to it. I thought we should try and be as different as possible from the movies, and we should have no costumes. But it worked very well with the stories that Grant wanted to tell.
But have you seen the movies, or was it separately? Because the idea which you mentioned that Grant was thinking on, which is very close to, I think, with the very first movies of Bryan Singer, and even the closest, they look very close to the movies. Have you seen the movies?
Yeah, I saw. I saw the first two anyway. Yeah, I mean, I'd seen the movies. I'd seen at least one, maybe two of the movies when we started this. So there was certainly an influence, without a doubt. Yeah.
Okay. So there's a great anecdote. I didn't think if you have seen it or not, because I know that you told me one time that you was chosen by George Lucas for a Star Wars comic book, even that you haven't seen a Star Wars movie.
Yeah. George Lucas wanted to. He brought out a book called Star Wars Visions, and it was a large book with 30 years of production art from the movies. So it was character designs and storyboards and all sorts of things, and it was very successful. And then they decided to bring out a book called Star Wars Comics, and it was a big hardcover coffee table book, and it was 30 years of highlights from Star Wars comics. And George Lucas went through somebody put all the artwork onto an iPad or whatever, and they flicked through it, and he kept stopping and saying, yeah, I like this one, I like that one. And so he chose all his favorite parts, all his favorite artists, all his favorite pages and covers from the Star Wars comics. And then he had a short list of maybe 8 or 10 artists who hadn't done any Star Wars. And he wanted to commission us. So it was myself and Paul Pope and Amanda Connor and some others. And when I got the email inviting me to do this, I was like, oh, I've not seen any Star Wars. And my wife went out and bought me like a box set of the first 6 movies. And I started at number 1, like the new number 1. And so I watched the first 3, and they were interesting. And then I got to number 4, A New Hope, and I loved it. Yeah. But I also had seen parts of it over the years, maybe if it was on television at Christmas time, or maybe seeing bits and pieces at comic conventions. I recognised lots of it. And of course, I felt very strongly how much it had influenced other things that I had seen. So by the time I drew the Star Wars piece, I had seen the first 4, but I haven't seen them all yet. I'll get round to it someday. But,
maybe you should go to Empire Strikes Back.
Well, everybody says that's the best one.
Might be a good
my sons have both watched the Mandalorian, and they were very impressed with that. So
the Mandalorian is pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to trying that. Yeah.
So, But let's go back to the X-Men. Here I have some of your stuff. Maybe I think this is maybe the first page of the X-Men.
That is the first page, yeah.
And it was inked by Tim
Townsend.
Tim Townsend, yeah. And you made the pencils and you had another inker.
I think there were maybe 6 or more inkers credited with working on the 10 issues that I worked on, but some of those inkers gave some of the pages to their assistants. So sometimes I would be at a comic convention and somebody would come up and say, I inked 4 of your X-Men pages because I was working with so-and-so. And so, yeah, I knew going into this job that I was going to need inkers because I wasn't fast enough to pencil and ink a monthly book. It's never been something I enjoy, having other people inking my work, but I accepted that's the way it had to be, and it was just a period of adjustment, trying to find a way of working that where I could give the inkers the amount of information they needed to do their thing.
Yeah. We will see also some of your pencil artwork, and then really I'm so amazed because it's so detailed. I think really, there are few people who are so close and so fine with pencils. But I like also the way what you made from the Beast. I think this is also some typical things which Grant and you changed, that it's more an animal.
Well, this idea for the Beast came from Grant. He spoke to me about the fact that he never understood why the Beast looked sort of like Wolverine. It didn't make sense to him, and he thought that the Beast from Beauty and the Beast, the Disney version, seemed closer, and the source of that Beast, of course, was a French director, Jean Cocteau, who made an early black and white film called La Belle et la Bête, Beauty and the Beast. And I had seen that years previously when I was an art student. I saw that and Orpheus, another of his films. And the idea was that because the Beast had previously been a beast that looked like Wolverine, Grant wanted there to be some kind of transition, like he was mutating again. And he was turning more into a lion beast, and which would mean that he would be losing his human or primate style hands, and they would be going more towards paws, and how that would impact on the things that he could do. So there was a psychological struggle. There was a practical struggle. You know, he still had the same brilliant mind. He was still the epitome of the erudite gentleman, but he had these other struggles. So I thought it was an interesting take on the Beast. I was happy to.
Yeah, I think this is pretty unique. Really, I think this is one of the big changes you made on the book.
Sure.
And this cover, I've seen it in the exhibition in A Coruña when we had been there as well. Yeah, I think this is one, for me, really one of the best drawings I've ever seen of Professor X. And I think it's Evil Twin as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this was the storyline was that Professor X had a female twin who was as brilliant and as powerful as him, but was evil, and that she had trapped her brother, Professor X, in her mind. So he was in a psychic prison, and thinking about that storyline, I did some thumbnail roughs for the cover, and as is often the case, the simplest, most graphic representation of Professor X being trapped in his twin sister's mind was to put his head in the center of her head, and with both of them uplit for dramatic effect, it meant that his head was floating in the darkness that was inside her head. So it was one of a number of rough drawings that I came up with in trying to encapsulate the theme of the story. And as is often the case, it was the simplest idea that seemed the most effective.
Yeah, really, I think it's great. The black and white, wow, really, I love that one. And one other thing, when the new X-Men started, some comic book artists in Munich showed me the book and said, "You have to see that this doesn't look like an American superhero book. It's such a European stuff." Okay, at that time, Scotland had been in the EU. Then you were in Europe, but even though, I think really it's different style, like other Marvel books. It looks a little bit like a mixture between Mobius and maybe Salvador Dali.
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly it didn't look or read like a regular Vertigo book. The X-Men, I had read some X-Men like Uncanny, the Jim Lee and had been drawing, when I was at the start of my career, and when I was ready to start New X-Men with Grant, I reread the original Stan Lee and Jack Kirby X-Men, but I was coming on board to translate Grant's scripts the best way that I could. And a lot of people, I think a lot of people who had already been buying the X-Men found the change in writing style and the change in art style, they found it problematic. It didn't look or feel like an X-Men title the way they had been used to seeing X-Men titles. And I remember at the time, some of the fan reaction was like, like Grant and myself were a couple of guys from Vertigo who didn't know how to do superheroes properly. And that changed. It changed over the tenure of the book. It changed relatively quickly. Critically, we got good reviews right from the start, but the fan reaction was very, very mixed at the beginning. And I remember being at a comic convention in Sao Paulo, CCXP, huge comic convention, and I was doing a question and answer panel, and somebody said, like you were saying earlier, that what Grant and I did on New X-Men was revolutionary, and it was a highlight in the X-Men history. And the question was, how did it feel starting an X-Men book knowing that it was going to be a classic?
No, and I was at the beginning.
We didn't know it was going to be a classic. Yeah. Grant warned me at the start that the way he was going to write it was completely different from the way it had been written for 20 years previously, at least. And he wanted me to just do the kind of storytelling following his direction in the script, but the kind of storytelling that I would normally do on his scripts, which would make it look very different. And he warned me, he said, not everybody's going to like this. And sure enough, the reaction was very, very mixed at first. But over time, it has become more accepted and more respected. Yeah, it certainly wasn't everybody's taste at the start.
But I think here it's good to see how you work with pencils, and then what the ink and what the color will do about your work.
Mm-hmm.
Really great stuff. And here are some of your pencils. And really, I think it's great how clear the pencil work is. I think the inker knows which lines he should take.
I was leaving nothing to chance.
Yeah. And then you had some small other steps at Marvel in one Daredevil special.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, this was it was a significant issue of Daredevil when Bryan Michael Bendis was writing it, and I think it was Alex Maleev who was the regular artist. And in one of the outsized anniversary issues, they wanted a number of guest artists to come in and do one page or a short story or whatever, and my contribution was Daredevil fighting the Hand, and I had been very impressed with a Frank Miller drawing of Daredevil fighting the Hand, which was used on the cover of one of his comics. I think it was with Chris Claremont, and subsequently with the collected, the trade paperback. And in fact, that was Wolverine. That was Wolverine fighting the Hand.
That was Wolverine with Chris Claremont. That's it.
Yeah, it was Wolverine. And but the dynamic was the same. It was one character greatly outnumbered by a lot of deadly adversaries, and I did a number of thumbnail roughs for this piece as well, and eventually I came to the idea that rather than have him rooted to the ground, if he was tumbling through the air from a rooftop, I would be able to create a composition where I had more people in a more dynamic state of movement than I would if they were all rooted on the ground. So this is why it ended up looking like this.
Great. And you worked also on Captain America?
This was an interesting one. I was approached by an editor about doing a thing for a book called Red, White and Blue. And it was a collection of short stories about Captain America. And I was told that I had to supply them with black and white artwork, and it would be printed in black and white. Now, I don't know if I misread the email or I wasn't paying attention in the phone call, but I thought it was just going to be in black and white. And I inked it all with a brush. And when it came out, they had spotted some red and blue on it, which I wish I had known at the time. I might have done it slightly differently, but it was certainly I very much enjoyed the story and working on this piece, and I also, it was the first time I had inked with a brush for many years, so it was a story set back in the Second World War, so I wanted it to feel kind of vintage or classic, so hence the using a brush to ink it rather than pens.
So you worked on so much important characters from Marvel. When Marvel will ask you again, which character might be interesting for you for the next?
I'm very keen in Spider-Man. I think as a character, as a person, Spider-Man is very interesting.
The old Spider-Man, Peter Parker, or the new Spider-Man, yes, Miles Morales?
Peter Parker. I also, because I think for so many teenagers and young adults, I think Peter Parker, I think he's a character that resonates because he has insecurities and shortcomings. On the opposite end of the spectrum, in terms of character, we have Frank Castle.
Punisher.
If I was working with the right writer, I think I could really enjoy doing a Punisher story. Daredevil is a character that I have loved since I was a child, and the only thing that's slightly off-putting is the cityscapes, because you can't get away from Daredevil being in New York City. If I could have a Daredevil story that was set in the desert or in Antarctica, that would be
a Scottish connection. How about this?
Daredevil in space, you know, I wouldn't throw any buildings. But I think maybe the Marvel character that I'm most interested in might be the Hulk.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons for that, I loved the Hulk when I saw early Marvel comics when I was a young child. And I also liked the Hulk TV show when I was maybe 10, 12. I don't know what age I was when I first saw that.
Lou Ferrigno.
Yeah. But I realized later in life that the Hulk obviously, very obviously, shared some characteristics with a famous Scottish novel called The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Yeah, definitely.
And having read that as an adult, and loving Akira, and when Tetsuo morphs into something greater, and Mobius short story The Long Tomorrow, when the shapeshifter character, there's a number of different influences of mine, and Robert Louis Stevenson, Katsuhiro Otomo, and Mobius being three obvious personal influences. I actually think that I would very much enjoy working on a unique, self-contained Hulk story.
I think this might be the story I want to see. I would be happy to see your Hulk. And my small son, Paul, he is 4 years old. He loves the Hulk. But sometimes he is like the Hulk.
No.
So only a little about Superman maybe, but on the other side, I think All-Star Superman is such an important book. So maybe you can talk a little bit how this started, because I think it was a very special project. DC did one thing, All-Star Batman and Robin with Frank Miller and Jim Lee, with the two big guns they had. On the next two big gun then was Grant Morrison and you doing Superman.
Yeah. Grant, we had done We Three together, and creatively that was a very, very satisfying piece of work for me to have been involved with, and I was very keen to do more creator-owned work. but Grant said, before we do another creator-owned project, I'd like you to draw Superman for me. And at first I was like, you could get anybody to draw Superman. I would like to do another personal project. And he said, Vin, I've written 12 stories that join up to make one bigger story. And it's everything I want to say about Superman. It's everything I love about Superman. And he started telling me the story. And right from the start, I was hooked. Yeah. And he told me this story, and I'll give you a very short version of it. He tells it very well. But basically, he was at San Diego, and he went outside to take some time to himself. And a Superman, I don't know if he was a cosplayer or a lookalike, but a big, strong, handsome guy dressed as Superman came over and sat beside him and started talking to him. And the guy seemed completely relaxed and at ease. And Grant thought, this is the way Superman would be. If you're all powerful and completely invulnerable, you would never be standing in a heroic pose. You would never be ribbed and clenched. You would be relaxed and open and friendly. And he wanted me to do this first cover, the image on the right-hand side, of Superman just sitting in the clouds, looking down on the city that he protects and turning to look at us in a very, very relaxed fashion. And then the image on the left was, once the 12 issues had been published, and then the 12 issues were then collected in 2 trade paperbacks of 6 issues each. And then they wanted a new cover for the 12 issues being published together in the absolute format in the slipcase. And Grant told me that he liked the idea of Superman standing on the moon, looking at the Earth, and maybe a version with crypto in it as well. Maybe the moon, the Earth, and Superman being in a straight line, maybe being in a triangular formation. And I did lots of thumbnails, but none of them I was completely happy with. Most of them involved Superman having his back to us, so that we were looking in the same direction that he was looking. And I knew, or I thought I knew, that DC wouldn't want to go with that. They're not keen. Most comic book publishers aren't keen to have the back of a main character on the cover of a book. And so I picked from all the roughs that I had done, I picked the 6 that I liked best. And then I put a 7th one down in the corner. It was just in one sheet that I can't remember if I faxed it or I scanned it and emailed it maybe. But in the bottom right-hand corner, I drew a little image of Superman floating in the sky. A bit like an angel, a bit like the figure of Christ in Michelangelo's Last Judgment in the Sistine Chapel. And they get back to me straight away and said, yeah, that wee one down there, number 7. And if you saw the original art for that, I mean, it's like a very, very simple pencil line drawing, just a clear line. And and it's almost the opposite end of the spectrum from the image on the right, where we're up close to him and we're seeing him as a very kind, gentle, calm person. And then on the left, we're seeing him in a slightly more iconic way, but still more like an angel or a savior rather than a superhero. And I think the two actually go quite well in retrospect.
Yeah, I think really these are maybe 2 of the most iconic Superman pictures I know. I think really I love it. And I love it, the way that he can sit in the clouds. Really, the next short one you worked with Neil Gaiman on Sandman.
Yeah, there's a funny story about this. Neil Gaiman had finished the Sandman series and had gone off writing American Gods and Coraline and various other books, and he was doing very well as an author of books. And Karen Berger spoke to him and said, "What do we need to do to get you to come back and do some more Sandman?" And he said, "Get me my international dream team of artists." And I wasn't on the list. So he wrote a book, and each chapter concentrated on a different sibling from the Endless. So one was about death, one was about dream, one was about destruction, and so on. And he had a list of artists that he wanted. Michelangelo Prado, of course, was one of them. Milo Manara, another, and so on. And Mobius was one of his choices. And whoever Neil or Karen was dealing with in trying to get Mobius to do the story, they had said, his health isn't good, so make it a short story, like no more than 8 pages. And if possible, make each page just a splash page, or at most a splash page with an inset panel. And as it happens, Mobius's health wasn't good enough and he couldn't do it, so they needed to find somebody else. And it was either Karen Berger or Shelley Bond that approached me about it, and they said, I could paint it if I wanted. And I got this script from Neil Gaiman. It was just 8 pages, and it was beautiful. It was just it was sparsely written, very poetic, very well balanced, and just enough description to inspire. Wasn't dogmatic, wasn't prescriptive, just enough description and no more. And I drew roughs for the pages and sent them in. They were accepted, and then I drew the pages on watercolor paper and painted it. And it's one of the most satisfying jobs that I've done. It was creatively, it was a joy to work on.
When we were in A Coruña, I asked which of your artwork is hanging at your apartment, and you said the story is hanging. Is it still in your apartment hanging, or you have to take care on the watercolor maybe?
Yes, well, it's behind ultraviolet glass, and it's also in a room where we have a linen curtain, which allows some light in, but it's very soft light. So they're still in good condition.
That's good to hear. So I have prepared more pictures, but I think we have to jump because we're running out of time. On the other side, we wanted to talk a lot about Jupiter's Legacy. So I think I jumped to Jupiter's Legacy. It's a pity because this is really great Batman stuff as well. But here we are. Here's Jupiter's Legacy. Maybe you can start about the project, how Mark Millar came to you. And yeah, you recognized from the beginning that this might be a big job.
Yes, Mark originally, he was organizing a convention in London. And he knew I didn't go to many conventions. So he asked me to meet him in a bar in Glasgow to talk about the convention, to persuade me to go to it. And as soon as we started talking, he started asking me about why I hadn't done any more creator-owned work since We Three, and I explained about All-Star Superman and Batman and Robin and why I had done them and why it had been a good thing. And then he said he had a creator-owned thing that he thought I would be good for. And I said, well, I don't want a team book and I don't want a long project. I want something short and concise with maybe just one or two characters. And he said, no, this is a big story with hundreds of characters. And but when he started talking to me about it, the more he talked, the more I got interested. And before I knew it, I had agreed to do it. And one of the beauties of working on a creator-owned book is that you don't have any continuity. You don't have any previous writers and artists who have set things out that you then can't change. It really was just about myself and Mark getting together to tell the kind of story that we wanted to tell in the way that we wanted to tell it. And it on the one hand, it turned out to be a very, very satisfying piece of work to be working on. And then, of course, Mark had said early on that he reckoned it would definitely be a movie, and he had people that were interested. And as time went on, that slowly changed into, no, it's going to be a TV show. And I was never 100% sure if he was right about the fact that it was going to happen, or if he was just trying to keep me interested. But it did happen. So, from my point of view, drawing the comic, it was very, very satisfying.
So yeah, we have the cast of the TV show. Here we see your pencil work and then the colors. Mm-hmm. So how was the beginning with Netflix and Jupiter's Legacy? How much have you been involved in the production?
I wasn't much involved in the production. Most of the sets were built based on the existing comic work. Most of the costumes were made based on the existing comic work. And a large part of the plot was based on the comic. I was invited to a set visit in Toronto where most of the filming happened. And I went with my wife and children. I've got 3 children, and the youngest one's a teenager. She was 15 at the time, and the 2 boys were in their 20s. And so none of us had been on a film set before, so it was really exciting. And we met the team that were doing the special effects. We met the team that made the miniature models. We met some of the team that built the sets. We met the costume designer. We saw some of the sets, some of the green screen stages. We saw some early rushes. It was really exciting. So I did artwork for one of the trailers, but I wasn't much involved, and I didn't mind. I was busy doing other things, but also one of the beauties of working this way is that you make the comic, and the comic is what it is. And if a film or a TV show or a video game comes out and it's even better than the comic, then that's great. Mm. If it's not as good as a comic, kind of doesn't matter because the comic's already there.
Yeah,
it's the same thing. So I was okay about the fact that I let them do what they did, and the the sets, the special effects, the costumes, everything was.
The costumes are very, very close to the comic book, which is fun for me because lots of critics in the internet say the comics, the costumes are too colorful for a superhero, and I think, well, it's the same way they look in the comic book. You have to read the comic book.
I mean, I actually think that the costumes are better in the TV show than in the comic, because what happened was Mark explained to me that the old school superheroes like the Utopian here, they're going back to they got their powers in the 1930s, much like Superman, and they had simple old-fashioned costumes with emblems on their chest and capes. And then subsequent generations had action suits without capes, and then other younger heroes had no costumes at all, and it reflected different eras in the evolution of comics. And I think if the TV show had made the older heroes, if they had given them very simple costumes, like the Christopher Reeves Superman costume, for instance, like the way they looked in the comic, if they were that simple, it would have looked, to a modern television audience, I think it would have looked either cheap or old-fashioned. And I think what they did with putting all the extra detail into there are patterns on the costumes which echo the code that was on the island where they got their powers, like secret symbols and stuff. And I think for that reason, I think the costumes for the TV show work much better for television than the costumes from the comic did.
Mm-hmm. But even that, if you see here the picture, I think they tried to be as close to the comic books as it could be.
Oh yeah, they certainly stayed very true to the comics a lot of the time. Yeah.
So yeah, maybe I guess this might be a good point for questions. Nina, are there already questions there?
There are. Maybe you can turn off the PowerPoint and then.
Yes, here we go.
There you go. So we had quite a few questions via email, but most of them you have already answered, Vince. So I would just ask the ones that are still open. The first one was, when did you start drawing comics, and did you read a lot of comic books when you were a child?
I read a lot of comic books when I was a child, but some of them were Scottish published children's comics, like the Beano and the Dandy. Some of them were spy comics and war comics. The Bruins is a family drama from a Sunday newspaper. When I was a little older, I read old back issues of Mad Magazine and reprints of eerie and creepy and weird science and sinister tales. And I didn't really start getting into comics in any serious way until I started working in the Glasgow underground comic Electric Soup, because what happened was some of the other artists who were working on that comic were already current comic book fans. And when I started working for Electric Soup, this underground comic, I was introduced to various French, Italian, Spanish, American, and Japanese comics. I was given Frank Miller and Jeff Darrow's Hard Boiled. I was given Watchmen, Akira, Blueberry, The Incal, Hellboy. I was given lots of Mouse, the Furry Freak Brothers, Milo Manara. I was given lots of Charles Burns, Chris Ware, Dan Clowes. I was given lots and lots of comics that the other guys that were working in our comic had discovered and thought were examples of the best of what was happening in different aspects of comics at the time. So over a period of maybe just 6 months, I was introduced to maybe 20 or 30 different writers and artists who were doing quite extraordinary work. And I was about 20, 21 years old at the time. So I hadn't seen a lot of contemporary comic books at that point. And it was a kind of baptism of fire. It was like a real eye opener. I was like, I couldn't believe how broad and how brilliant comics could be.
Great, next question.
Thank you. Just getting to the next one. I think this one was already partly answered, but not the first part. So do you have a favorite comic book that you already worked on? Or is there one comic hero or book that you desperately want to draw in the future? So I think the second part you have already answered, but
yeah,
the first one, yeah.
The first one, was it a favorite comic book?
It was like, do you have
character you had worked on? Which was the favorite your favorite character you had worked on?
The favorite I've worked on, I've got 3 favorites that I've worked on. There's the Sandman story that we spoke about, and it's because I penciled, inked, and painted the work. So everything on the page that isn't the writing is my work. So I was in control of everything. It's not perfect. There are things that I would go back and change if I had to do it again, but there's nothing there that I don't like that's caused by working with an inker or a colorist or anybody else interfering with the work. So that one's very special to me. We 3 is special to me because Grant and I really tried very hard to be experimental with the storytelling and to try and tell the story visually in ways that were new. Jupiter's Legacy, of course, is very important to me because it's a personal project, and it went on to become a television show, which was a special thing for me. And All-Star Superman, what's special to me about All-Star Superman is the writing. It's not my art. I did the best work that I could at the time, but the stories themselves resonate with people. And since I drew that story, every time I go to a comic book convention, usually quite a lot of people, but there's always some people come to my table and they tell me what those stories meant to them and how they helped them at the stage they were at in their life and how those stories touched people. And it's to be involved in a project like that really made a difference to people it's a privilege, and I'm very grateful for that.
Well, thank you. I think I have a nice question to wrap it up. So let's make this the last one. The drawing of Professor X we just saw on the PowerPoint. First of all, it's a real piece of art. And how long did it take you to draw it?
Well, thank you. First of all, I think usually I can do the fastest I can work when I'm doing interior pages is 2 pages a week. If I'm doing a cover when I'm doing all the colors myself, either on paper or in Photoshop, I'm usually 4, 5, 6 days to create the cover image. If I'm doing the cover in black and white, as was the case here, it probably usually just takes 2 or 3 days. I think this one might have been a little faster because it was just a headshot. So I'm guessing it probably took me about 2 days.
Thank you. Well, thank you both for the really interesting and insightful talk. Thank you all for watching. The video will still be available on YouTube if you have friends or family who missed it tonight and who still want to watch it. Our exhibition is still open until September 30th. So this is next week on a Thursday will be the last chance to visit our exhibition. 60 years Marvel Comics, which is great. We have almost 200 original drawings, and it's a really nice exhibition. You shouldn't miss it if you're in Munich or around. Thank you, Michael, for your time. Thank you, Vincent, for your time and your expertise. And I wish you all a very nice evening. Good night.